If strategic silence is about how power moves in a room, this is about how power decides who it can trust. Trust inside senior environments is rarely announced, rarely explained, and most of the time, it begins long before you realize anyone is paying attention. Many professionals assume trust grows from performance. Deliver strong results, work hard, be dependable. Over time, people notice, and trust follows. But senior leadership doesn't operate on that assumption. At higher levels, trust is not treated as a reward. It is treated as risk management. Before access expands, before authority is shared, before decisions begin to include you, something quieter happens. Observation. Not of your output alone, but of your psychological orientation when conditions become unclear. Senior leaders are not asking whether you can do the work. That question is usually already answered. What they want to know is something else. How predictable are you when certainty disappears? Because the higher someone sits in a hierarchy, the more uncertainty they manage daily. Ambiguity, incomplete information, competing pressures, conflicting priorities. These are normal conditions at the top. And when they evaluate others, they are not searching for perfection. They are searching for stability. This is the first shift most people miss. Trust does not begin with your strongest moments. It begins with how you behave when the situation stops being comfortable. Because long before promotions or access appear, leadership is already deciding who feels safe to bring closer. Every interaction inside an organization updates an invisible ledger. Senior leaders rarely discuss it openly, but it exists. A quiet record of how much responsibility can safely move toward you. The ledger tracks patterns, how you handle vague instructions, delayed feedback, shifting expectations, and pressure without clear answers. These moments feel ordinary from your side. From above, they are data. This is usually where careers quietly separate. Some people move toward influence, while others remain visible but supervised. As Gracian suggested, character reveals itself gradually. Leadership simply watches long enough for the pattern to appear, and that pattern rarely shows during success. It shows during uncertainty. Most professionals imagine evaluation as something formal, reviews, promotions, feedback sessions. But the real evaluation happens quietly. Senior leaders watch patterns. Who needs reassurance? Who escalates quickly? Who creates calm when clarity is missing? Trust feels mysterious because it doesn't arrive through a single event. It accumulates until a pattern becomes undeniable. And once that pattern forms, hierarchy decides something important. Who becomes an extension of leadership and who remains permanently supervised? The difference is rarely intelligence. It is psychological predictability. And this is where evaluation stops feeling like performance and starts becoming psychological profiling. Ambiguity is one of the most common leadership tests and one of the least understood. You receive direction that feels incomplete. Expectations are unclear. What looks like poor communication is often something else. Observation. Leadership is watching how you orient yourself when certainty disappears. Some people flood the environment with questions. Others freeze. Some move too fast to escape discomfort. Each reaction communicates the same thing: how much independent judgment you can apply without creating risk. The real question isn't competence. It's whether you can be trusted without constant instruction. A sovereign mindset isn't reckless guessing. It's calibrated movement, reasonable assumptions, clear boundaries, and adjustment as information appears. Ambiguity reveals whether your confidence depends on external clarity. The test is rarely about being right. It is about how you think when no one can guarantee the outcome. Another moment arrives quietly. You send an update. No response. A proposal goes out. Feedback slows down. Meetings end without clear affirmation. Silence begins to stretch. This is where many professionals generate what can be called reaction receipts, visible signals that reveal internal instability. They follow up repeatedly. They over-explain their reasoning. They fill silence with additional justification. From their perspective, they are being responsible. From a senior leader's perspective, something else appears. Supervision cost. Because every sign that you require reassurance implies more future management. Silence is not always neglect. Sometimes it is observation. Leadership is watching whether you remain stable when external validation disappears. Because this is often the moment trust quietly divides between those who keep operating with clarity and those who reveal dependency on reassurance. Can you continue moving without immediate confirmation that you are right? Or does uncertainty pull you into visible anxiety? The answer shapes trust more than most people realize. At senior levels, cost is not measured only in money or time. It is measured in attention. Because once attention becomes the cost, the standard quietly changes. Leaders protect their attention aggressively. When someone reacts impulsively, escalates quickly, or demands frequent confirmation, they consume attention. And attention is the rarest resource in leadership. This is why emotional leakage matters. A strong reaction may feel harmless in the moment, but it signals something larger: unpredictability under pressure. The higher the role, the more expensive unpredictability becomes. Trust flows toward those who reduce cognitive load, not those who increase it. Pressure arrives without warning. Deadlines compress, priorities shift, resources become limited. At this stage, many professionals believe leadership is watching output alone. But often, the deeper evaluation is psychological. How does pressure change your presence? Some people become frantic. Others become defensive. Some begin explaining before thinking. Marcus Aurelius wrote about governing one's response rather than being governed by circumstance. In modern organizational terms, this translates into containment. Containment means pressure does not spill outward unnecessarily. It means urgency does not become chaos. Senior leaders observe whether your presence stabilizes or destabilizes the environment, because this is where they quietly project you forward, imagining what happens if your influence expands. Someone who cannot contain pressure at a smaller level will magnify instability at a larger one, and trust never moves toward instability. Pressure exposes hidden patterns. Leaders notice how quickly you speak when challenged, whether your explanations become longer or clearer, whether your tone shifts toward defensiveness, whether decisions become reactive. These signals matter because they predict future behavior. Leadership is not trying to read your intentions. They are reading your patterns. Patterns are easier to trust than promises. Not all tests involve stress. Some arrive disguised as opportunity. Extra responsibilities appear. Requests expand beyond your role. Expectations quietly grow. This is a boundary test. Senior leaders watch whether you absorb everything automatically or whether you manage scope with calm clarity. Many people believe saying yes demonstrates commitment, but endless availability communicates something else: lack of prioritization. Authority requires selectivity. If you accept everything without calibration, leadership may conclude you cannot yet protect focus at higher levels. The cost is subtle. You become known as reliable, but not necessarily strategic. Reliability earns work. Strategy earns trust. At some point, professionals realize that working harder does not change how they are perceived. The shift begins when effort stops being the primary signal. A sovereign mindset is not detachment or arrogance. It is internal stability that does not fluctuate with every external response. You begin to operate with orientation rather than reaction. You pause before responding. You clarify before escalating. You decide which situations deserve your energy. And gradually, something changes. People stop checking on you as frequently. Decisions begin to move through you rather than around you. At this point, leadership is no longer evaluating what you can do. They are imagining what happens when your influence expands. Not because you demanded authority, because your behavior reduced uncertainty. Senior leaders rarely say this openly, but they often trust calm judgment more than visible brilliance. Brilliance can be unpredictable. Calm judgment scales. When leaders consider who to bring closer to decision-making, they ask themselves a quiet question. Will this person make my environment more stable or more complicated? The answer is rarely based on technical skill alone. It comes from accumulated observations across small moments. Moments most people forget minutes after they happen. But leadership remembers. Because those moments reveal how you carry responsibility before responsibility becomes official. At this stage, the pattern becomes clearer. There is another detail most people overlook. Senior leaders are not only observing how you handle difficulty, they are observing how you interpret responsibility itself. Two people can face the same situation and produce the same result, yet leave entirely different impressions. One moves with urgency that feels personal, as if every outcome is tied to identity. They speak as though success must be defended. They explain in long loops, trying to prove they deserve trust. The other moves with a quieter posture. They focus on the decision rather than the performance of competence. They communicate enough to create clarity, then allow the work to stand on its own. From the outside, both appear productive. But from a senior perspective, the difference is enormous. The first signals dependency on external confirmation. The second signals internal orientation. This distinction matters because leadership is constantly asking a hidden question. If this person gains more authority, will they need more supervision or less? Trust expands toward the person whose presence lowers monitoring requirements. That is why small behavioral cues carry so much weight. How long you speak after making a point. How quickly you respond when challenged. Whether you defend decisions or simply explain them. Whether your tone changes when someone more senior enters the conversation. None of these behaviors exist in isolation. Together, they form a psychological profile. And senior leaders become skilled at reading these profiles because their own survival depends on it. Every time they extend trust, they are accepting risk on behalf of the organization. A single, unstable reaction at the wrong level can ripple outward, creating problems that are expensive to contain. So they learn to look for calm patterns. They notice who stays consistent when context changes. Someone who behaves one way with peers and another way with executives signals adaptation driven by status awareness. Someone whose behavior remains steady regardless of audience signals internal grounding. This is often the quiet dividing line between being seen as capable and being seen as ready. Capability solves problems. Readiness absorbs responsibility without changing shape. And this is where many professionals misunderstand what senior leaders mean when they say someone has presence. Presence is not charisma. It is not confidence performed outwardly. It is the absence of visible instability. It is the sense that the person in front of you does not need the room to reassure them before they can think clearly. When leaders sense that, trust begins to move almost automatically. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily, because stability reduces friction. And in high-level environments, the people who reduce friction are the ones who gradually gain access. Trust is not built through dramatic displays of competence. It grows through repeated signals that you can carry uncertainty without transmitting instability to others. And once senior leaders begin to see that stability, a different phase starts. the tests become less visible and more subtle. They begin to watch not only how you respond to pressure, but how you think when no one is watching closely anymore. At some point, something changes. The obvious tests begin to disappear, not because evaluation ends, but because it moves to a deeper level. Instructions feel clearer, pressure becomes quieter, feedback arrives less frequently. Many professionals misread this moment as safety. In reality, they have entered a second phase, one where leadership is no longer watching how you react to difficulty, but how you think when supervision fades. The question shifts, not, can this person handle pressure, but what does this person do when no one is directing their attention? This is the moment evaluation becomes invisible and far more decisive. Because trust at senior levels is not about surviving controlled situations. It is about self-direction when structure becomes thin. And this phase reveals something deeper than competence. It reveals orientation. When leaders begin reducing oversight, they are not stepping away completely. They are creating space to observe how you use freedom. And freedom introduces a different kind of risk, because mistakes made without supervision reveal how you think, not just how you execute. Some people become hesitant, slowing down without constant feedback. Others become impulsive, mistaking autonomy for permission to move without calibration. Both reactions signal the same underlying issue: dependence on external structure. True autonomy looks different. It is quiet, deliberate, measured. You begin to notice that trusted individuals do not announce every decision. They do not seek approval for every move, but they also do not disappear into isolation. They maintain alignment without constant visibility. This balance is difficult because autonomy introduces a new psychological trigger: the fear of invisible failure. When oversight decreases, uncertainty increases, and uncertainty tempts people to overcompensate, either through excessive communication or unnecessary caution. Senior leaders watch closely here. They are asking, can this person maintain judgment without external correction? Earlier, reaction receipts came from obvious moments: pressure, silence, ambiguity. Now they become subtler. How you frame updates becomes important. Some professionals report progress as though defending themselves. Others communicate with clarity and brevity, assuming competence rather than proving it. This difference signals mindset. A defensive tone implies insecurity about authority. A clear tone implies ownership. Ownership is one of the strongest predictors of trust because it reduces the need for intervention. Leaders do not want constant explanations. They want evidence that decisions are being made responsibly. The less emotional energy attached to communication, the more stable the signal appears. Eventually, small decisions appear that seem insignificant. A meeting is delegated to you. A client issue lands in your inbox. A conflict arises between priorities, and no immediate guidance follows. These moments are not random. They are judgment tests. Senior leaders want to see how you weigh trade-offs. Do you escalate immediately to protect yourself? Do you delay action, waiting for certainty? Or do you make a reasonable decision? Document your reasoning and move forward. Judgment is rarely about perfect outcomes. It is about reasoning under incomplete information. Leaders watch whether you understand context before moving. Speed without context creates risk. Calibrated movement builds trust. There is a subtle mistake many high performers make at this stage. They try too hard to align. They mirror leadership language. They seek constant consensus. They avoid independent viewpoints to appear safe. But excessive alignment signals dependency rather than maturity. Senior leaders do not want replicas of themselves. They want people who can think independently while staying strategically aligned. The difference is critical. Alignment means understanding direction. Dependency means waiting to be told how to think. Trust expands toward independent thinkers who remain predictable, not toward those who simply agree. As responsibility grows, the behavioral X-rays change. Leaders begin noticing how you handle disagreement without emotional escalation, whether you can challenge ideas without threatening cohesion, how you manage uncertainty for others, whether your presence creates clarity during confusion. At this level, technical skills fade into the background. Psychological signals dominate perception. A calm disagreement can increase trust more than silent agreement, because it shows stability under tension. Authority begins to grow when your thinking becomes visible, but your reactions become quieter. Silence returns here, but differently than before. Earlier, silence tested insecurity. Now, silence becomes a strategic tool. Trusted individuals do not rush to fill every pause. They allow space for others to think. They speak when they have direction, not when they feel pressure to perform. This restraint signals confidence in judgment. And senior leaders notice who can tolerate pauses without anxiety, because decision-making at higher levels often involves waiting. Waiting for more information, waiting for conditions to change, waiting for timing to align. Someone who cannot sit with silence will struggle with strategic timing. One of the clearest signs that trust is forming is increased access. You are included in conversations slightly earlier. Context is shared before decisions are finalized. Questions shift from, "Can you do this?" to, "What do you think?" But access itself becomes another test. Some people treat new proximity as validation. They speak more, trying to prove they belong. Others observe, listen, and contribute with precision. Senior leaders pay attention to how you handle proximity to power. Do you become louder or more deliberate? Access magnifies behavior, and what was previously minor becomes highly visible. At higher levels, standards are rarely spoken explicitly. You are expected to sense them. This is where internal orientation matters most. People who rely on clear rules struggle when expectations become implicit. Those with the sovereign mindset adapt by reading context, what decisions are prioritized, how leaders allocate attention, what problems trigger urgency. They align themselves with the real priorities rather than the stated ones. And this ability signals readiness for greater trust. From a senior perspective, trust means something simple: predictable behavior under unpredictable conditions. Not perfection, not constant success. Predictability. Because predictability is what allows responsibility to scale without increasing risk. This is why calm judgment consistently outperforms visible intensity over time. Intensity attracts attention. Ability attracts responsibility. And responsibility is where real authority begins. Gracian emphasized discretion, the art of measured expression. In modern hierarchy, discretion becomes psychological economy. You do not react to every stimulus. You do not signal every emotion. You conserve energy for decisions that matter. And over time, people begin to feel something difficult to define. They feel safe placing weight on you. Not because you asked for trust, because your behavior makes trust feel low risk. Eventually, the most significant change happens quietly. You stop thinking about being evaluated. Your focus shifts toward clarity, direction, and long-term outcomes. And paradoxically, this is often when trust solidifies, because the desire to appear trustworthy disappears. What remains is consistency. Leadership notices when someone's behavior no longer changes depending on who is watching. That consistency becomes the foundation of authority. Senior leaders do not announce when they begin trusting you. There is no single moment. Trust accumulates through dozens of small observations. How you carry ambiguity, how you contain pressure, how you think when oversight fades, and how little your behavior changes when circumstances shift. In the end, the test is simple. Can responsibility move toward you without increasing uncertainty? When the answer becomes yes, trust stops being something you seek. It becomes something others quietly assume. There is one final layer that often goes unseen. By the time senior leaders begin trusting you, they are no longer evaluating whether you can handle tasks. They are watching whether you understand the weight that comes with influence. Responsibility changes the psychological environment around you. People begin reading your tone more closely. Your reactions carry more meaning. Small shifts in your behavior create larger effects than before. And this introduces a new discipline: emotional economy. At lower levels, expressing frustration or uncertainty may have limited consequences. At higher levels, those signals travel outward. They shape how others feel about risk, stability, and direction. Senior leaders pay attention to who understands this instinctively. They notice who can disagree without destabilizing a room, who can deliver difficult feedback without creating fear, who can absorb tension without passing it downward. Because trust is not only about how you manage yourself, it is about how your internal state affects the system around you. This is why leadership often feels quieter than expected. The people with the most influence usually move with the least visible strain. They are not emotionless, they are regulated, and regulation creates safety. When others feel psychologically safe around you, they begin to rely on your presence during uncertain moments. That reliance becomes another form of trust, one that cannot be requested or accelerated. It must accumulate. There is also a subtle shift in how mistakes are interpreted. Earlier in a career, mistakes are judged by outcomes. Later, they are judged by response. Senior leaders understand that uncertainty makes perfect outcomes impossible. What they observe instead is how quickly someone regains clarity after something goes wrong. Do they become defensive? Do they search for blame? Or do they stabilize the situation, extract the lesson, and move forward without drama? Recovery speed becomes a signal of maturity, because leadership is less about avoiding mistakes and more about preventing instability from spreading. Another pattern becomes visible at this stage. People who are close to trust often stop talking about themselves as much. Their language shifts from personal achievement to shared outcomes. They stop emphasizing effort and begin emphasizing direction. This shift matters because it signals psychological scale, the ability to think beyond individual performance toward collective movement. Senior leaders recognize this immediately. It signals that someone is beginning to think like an owner rather than a contributor. And ownership is the real threshold of trust. Ownership means you no longer ask, "How do I look in this situation?" Instead, what serves the larger direction best? When this shift happens, your behavior changes subtly. You speak with more precision. You interrupt less. You choose moments carefully. You stop reacting to every signal in the environment. From the outside, it looks like calm confidence. From the inside, it is simply clarity about what matters. This is why trust often feels invisible while it is forming. Nothing dramatic happens. No announcement is made. Instead, access expands gradually. Expectations rise quietly. People begin assuming you will handle things without detailed instruction. And one day you realize something has changed. Not because someone told you, but because the way others interact with you feels different. Questions become more strategic. Conversations become more candid. You are asked for perspective, not just execution. That moment is not the beginning of trust. It is the result of a long pattern finally becoming undeniable. And the pattern was never about perfection. It was about reducing uncertainty wherever you went. In the end, this is what senior leaders are always searching for: People whose presence lowers the temperature of complexity. People who make difficult environments easier to navigate. People whose reactions are measured enough that others can focus on thinking instead of managing emotion. When you understand that, trust stops feeling mysterious. It becomes predictable. Not because you perform differently, but because your steadiness begins to reduce uncertainty wherever you go. And once that happens, trust is no longer something being tested. It becomes something quietly assumed.